That's why people always ask me about China. China is particularly vulnerable. That's why they're trying to own and control Africa, because they know, the Americans will probably cut them off at some point, and the Russians will, not because they don't like China. It's just because the Russians have to protect their own populations too, and it's going to get very interesting.
Last year, the Federal Reserve printed more money in the month of June than they did in the past 20 years combined. Nearly 30% of all U.S. currency in circulation was printed during 2020. The U.S. dollar is on a fast track to inflation. It's more important than ever to protect your assets against rising inflation through stocks and crypto. This is why I highly recommend Trade Genius. I was able to profit myself because I learned to trade through Trade Genius Academy on the crypto side. I took part in various courses, personal coaching, chat rooms, signals trading tool. That's where I look for price signals in cryptocurrency from Bob Kudla at TradeGeniusAcademy.com, who also offers other signature trading tools for stocks, exchange-traded funds, binary options, and commodities. All you need is an internet connection to get started. Interact with Trade Genius community, fellow traders, and certified Trade Genius trades, alongside professionals who generate revenue for themselves in the stock market every single day. Live buy and sell alerts text to your phone. Learn more by going to TradeGeniusAcademy.com. And this summer, save by using the promo code SUMMER for 40% off all non-bundled items. And now on with the video. And good afternoon, everyone. Again, our monthly talk. You're going to love it this month. It seems in earnest that everything has begun. I'm here with Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. If you've been looking at the news in any way, shape, or form, all we're seeing now is crop losses across all major producers. China floods again in the same regions that never recovered from last year that were the grain producers for China. South Africa, riots in the streets, and we're starting to see it in earnest. It has begun. All these things we've talked about, Bob and I, for so many years now, about this grand solar minimum and the way it was going to pinch people's incomes to flow an enormous amount into agribusiness, and the way governments were not going to respond, because knowing that the grand solar minimum, like his fingerprints, that repairing the infrastructure, preparing for all of this is kind of a moot point in their eyes for dragging everybody and pulling everybody through across the finish line over the next, say, decade and a half. But what are we going to do for solutions amongst ourselves? So, just when Bob and I were talking a second ago, it's begun in earnest, and you have to understand that it is in play right now, this, and then how governments are going to respond. So Bob Kudla, TradeLikeAGenius.com. As always, we do a monthly, and this one is going to be exciting and exceptional. And please stick with us. There's so much information about to be unfurled and unraveled before your very eyes on how all this is connecting. And again, it's about what you can do personally, how you can keep your family safe during this time, because it's going to involve money, preparedness, and so many other things in between. So Bob, I appreciate you joining me. Floor is yours.
A 6 or 7 on the eruption scale potential. And it's right at the equatorial latitudes, where you get a Mount Pinatubo kind of a eruption, and then I think then all bets are. If you see that thing go off, first thing you do is you don't go home, you go right to Smart and Final or Costco or wherever, and you better load up a year's worth of food, because when everybody else figures it out, there'll be no food left, because that will knock out some of these growing regions.
So then what? Then we come up with these super ultra expensive solutions, which are great. And that's the biggest opportunity in human history, what you're looking at here, providing food in a more stable grow environment, perfect nutrient mix going through, perfect storage after harvest. I mean, you're right there. You can put it in the refrigerator at the optimum temperature within minutes after the harvest, versus having that on a truck for 4 hours blazing through a hot field. There's a lot of pluses to having vertical ag and really controlled greenhouse growing, but there's a huge associated cost with that. And I don't know where all these materials are going to come from, unless you, like you said, you start doing it at home and expropriating different factories. I mean, there's already laws on the book where they can walk into your house and take all your food for continuity of government here in the United States. So when you start looking at what's going to be required in terms of supply chains to get all these materials in place to be able to grow indoor, heaven forbid there would be a VEI 6 or 7, we would be so far behind the ball so quickly. I don't know. You have seems a really good insight into the companies operating into the food space that are going to be the most integral ones with the biggest opportunity in the markets, and crypto too, you know.
Yeah, the people, if people trade with us, those things that we point out, we're still in a trade Mosaic. Some of our subscribers, I didn't take the trade, but they took the trade with Seed this time, SEED, and that had a quick 20% move. You're going to get these spikes in these different types of trades. If you're really conservative and you don't want to be a day trader, you can definitely get involved in the trades with the grocery stores and things like that, and the wholesalers, and then the farmland. There's, like I said, there's an ETF for farmland out there. It's actually called FARM. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And so you want to buy the things that hurt when it drops on your foot, and people always ask me about gold and silver because it's kind of struggling. Bitcoin's kind of struggling right now. It's kind of a short-term anomaly because the Federal Reserve is buying up. Well, not buying up. They're allowing the banks to basically not loan and send all their collateral to the cash to the Federal Reserve, and they're paying them interest on it. And because the federal government is not producing these 1 to 3 year loans because they still have cash on their balance sheet that they're drawing down. And once that ends in September, October timeframe, you'll see the dollar weaken significantly, and you'll see these commodities, the precious metal side, start to really move, and you want to be positioned for that. But from a personal standpoint, as you know, when we and I first started talking, even preceding Trade Genius, I owned a solar energy company. I knew nothing about it. I just knew that we better get a hold of our energy independence. So I took it in my own hands and just started a company, got right people together, and we had a great 12-year run with it. Now solar is more of a commodity. It's not really interesting to me as a commodity. But from a food standpoint, 1,450 square feet using the French intensive method could feed a family of 4. So, does it take work? Yeah. In my backyard last year, my goal was to be able to produce vegetables for at least 1 meal a week throughout the whole year. This year, now it's 2 meals a week. And we've now produced our first, and I live in Southern California, our first real production in potatoes and onions. We just took off about 1.5 bushels of peaches off our tree. And, we're making jelly jams and pie and freezing. So, and I live in a very small yard because in Southern California, you don't have big yards like you have in the Midwest or in the South. I have a 5,000 square foot lot with the house on it, and you can still produce a lot of food if you do it right, do the rotation, spend a little time. I spend maybe a couple hours every Saturday on it, and I'm producing food, saving money, and creating a year-round crop for my family. And so that's what people need to do personally, and then professionally, you need to take your financials, and also not only just trading wise, but you need to get out of the debt. You need to have cash. Don't let them have cash. You need to have cash off the side. Okay, they're not doing digital everything yet. In case you need ready money, because like you were talking beforehand, comms go down. The internet goes down. Where I live by an area that should never go down, and we get these black spots every once in a while. We get these major draws on the internet that nobody can access it for a period of time because they're under investing in infrastructure because they don't want to put any money in their companies because it'll make the stock price go down. So we have all these perverse things happening. And we know the political situation. We have an incompetent administration that's really, really into dogma. They're not into solutions. People say, when you always ask the why question, I always cringe because they want this to happen because they see every tragedy as an opportunity to control. And you need to not be in a position to be controlled. So you need to be independent, not dependent. So that's my rant on that. So there's a lot of things you can do every single day. Get an e-bike. Don't drive your car all the time. There's things you can do to take a less of a draw off your living so that you can be used to it. And it was interesting. I have our cleaning lady. She's from Mexico, and we laugh all the time. Is that she goes, "Oh, the Americans, you guys have no idea what it's like to have nothing, and when things get hard." And she said, when it gets hard, you better find a Mexican friend because they can show you how to live and survive and thrive in an environment where things just aren't at your fingertips. And I said, that's very wise. Talk to people who've been in these situations where government doesn't help you, and make sure you understand what you need to do to be successful and be independent and be able to take care of your friends and family.
Yeah, that's well spoken. And, when Bob alluded to the comms down here, I live in a pretty rural area of East Tennessee. And somebody was doing some construction and dug through the fiber optic cable, the only one for this area, actually split it in half, or there was a full break. So our comms went down, or the internet went down for 36 hours. And it made me realize, even though, and I'm getting prepped out, we got all the walkie-talkies, we got short-term communications, marine radios. I didn't have my CB in my truck attenuated. So even though I had the CB, I didn't, because it's not like you can buy it out of the box like you used to and just throw it in whatever your vehicle and then it'll go. Now you have to have it attenuated. So, and I was thinking, because it's just the little things that I realized where I was super deficient. And with my ham radio, I hadn't downloaded the newest pack inside there. So, it quickly made me realize you got to stay on top of your comms game as well, because, at least the phones were working. And I was thinking, they talk about all these exercises coming up this month, and then the internet went down for such a prolonged period of time, 36 hours, almost 40 hours in this day and age is like an eternity and unheard of almost. But at least the phones were working. So it wasn't, if both the phone had stopped and the internet had stopped, I'd be like, all right, there's a little bit of a problem here going on. But it's all these other things, like how prepared are you right now to, if you do a full accounting in your house of, having the spare cash, like Bob talked about. We went to the Amish farm today, and I only had a brand new $100 bill, brand new, that I got from the bank. And they didn't even know if they were going to be able to break that or have want to give me the change, not have the change. They had the change, want to give me the change. They only did it because it was brand new, crispy, with all the brand new. You have a $100 bill in a grid down situation. That might not be helpful. That could be just as equivalent value of $1, because we don't have any change. You can take that or you don't get it. And, thinking about these self-sufficiency things moving forward, points of life. And where's the news fit into this? Because, in the beginning, when we started talking, that record heat up in the Northwest, the mainstream media forgot that there was record cold in the central part of the US at the same time, and record cold wiping out an enormous amount of crops, from corn to coffee to sugarcane down in Brazil and Argentina, like at the exact same days overlapping. And the snowstorms up in Canada happening right now during the summer. Why is that not being covered? The record gain of ice on Greenland. There's a lot of other signals out there saying, whoa, we're going into some really unusual times. And, Bob, I had a question for you about Argentina. They've suspended their corn and their beef exports they say until, the end of September, but I don't know, maybe they'll continue that. So if they're on a full export embargo, what other countries do you think are going to follow in that maneuver of stopping the food exports to keep stability at home? Because people were getting really, really angry at the food price rises and the inavailability of foods, beefs, corn, this kind of thing, the knock on, because they do manufacturing there too, into the supermarkets. So what other country do you think first? And then, what do you think would be the catalyst to get those countries to start moving that direction of withholding any kind of sort of food exports out to the rest of the world?
Yeah, well, Russia already did it. So Russia was actually first. And then Argentina, look, I would say the more autocratic the government, the more likely it is they're going to pull back, exports to protect their internal power, to give to their people. The United States and Australia probably be the last two, the big ones. Brazil gets too much of their hard currency from crops. So I would say we'd be the last. Europe will fence off, and just because they don't grow enough food. I think, ironically, I think the French are like the most productive farmers in Europe, and and they've been getting some chronic issues now with some of their grain harvest too. So, yeah, the place and Canada is basically going to become irrelevant. One thing I want to mention, I forgot, is that it just came out today, the USDA, the lowest oat production since they've been keeping records. Okay. Now, I don't know if that is because of the climate or people shifted off of oats because of the climate, or that they shifted off of oats because they wanted to grow corn, or wheat, to feed the animals or take it for export. But the fact that it was a headline, so there was the lowest ever. And you got to remember, when you go through the scale of importance, right? It goes, basically it's corn, soybeans, wheat, oats, barley, right? So, the later you can plant the season, the less valuable the crop is, and barley is like the last one. And so if Canada keeps having these issues that they're having, in the West, heat and drought, in the East, cool, wet, and icy, is that, Canada is effectively going to not be an export country. And right now it's cool. In the mid part, it's cooler and drier, which is not a really good sign for their production going forward. Elsa just came through as a tropical storm. And right now, what is it, July, 13th or 12th or whatever, right now, it's, there's actually a winter hurricane on Greenland right now. The backside of that hurricane, or that extra tropical depression, if you want to call it accurately, is snowing like crazy in Greenland right now. And that weather then's heading over to into Europe. So, and then Brazil, they've had snow where they never have snow. Just this, 2-3 weeks ago. It never snows in the areas that they're getting snow in the central highlands of Brazil. And you get a frost in that area, it's you're talking about wiping out corn, bananas, sugar, the whole 9 yards. So yeah, so look, it doesn't take many countries to cut off exports. That's why people always ask me about China. China is particularly vulnerable. That's why they're trying to own and control Africa, because they know, the Americans will probably cut them off at some point. And the Russians will, not because they don't like China, it's just because the Russians have to protect their own populations too. And it's going to get very interesting. That's why, people always ask me, where would you live in the world if you had to? I'm like, I'm staying in the good old USA, because you can move around and find an area that's tolerable. Some of these countries are going to be just intolerable places to live in. And if you want to see migration, you're going to see some really interesting migration in the next 10 years.
Yeah, and for those of you that are fans of geography, the Ukraine is another breadbasket. Imagine that, what has transpired over the last, 5 or 7 years, and we're coming into this grand solar minimum, and there was so much focus on taking Ukraine. That was one of the largest grain producing regions all across Europe and into Central Asia anyway, especially Kazakhstan is another one. I should be on Kazakhstan, another major producer, periphery producer. But, there's a lot of political happenings in Kazakhstan, and then all the things that went on in the Ukraine. I think they're totally related to what's happening now with the intensification. The cycles were known, I would say circa 1999, 98 with the solar activity. The second boost in warmth when they thought we were going into this type of cooling in the 1970s, but then they had the reprieve of those 2 solar cycles. And then if you look far enough back in the records, you start to see that double bump of that second and 2 warmer cycles following, and then you get the drop off in temperature, which is, now you look at it and you start to see, well, you could forecast that out going 22 years into the future from 1999 is when, right about now. Imagine that. So the cycles were known, and the superpowers would have been looking at this, because who controls food in this century controls the rest of the century. The oil control century was last century. That kind of doesn't, there's magnetic motors now. There's an enormous amount of free power coming out. There's, like you were involved with solar, and there's so much renewable power coming out. So oil has lost its 100% grip on energy production. It does seem that food is going to be the new play moving forward. And things are not as predicted. So I don't know why there's not more news media organizations looking back at what the predictions were from this whole United Nations crowd over there saying this, that, and the other. And there's just no accountability of predictions made that never came to fruition when, Bob and myself, we're talking about things that we have been for the last 5 years. They're all starting to tick off all the ducks in a row. We can check off, check. Oh, hey, they're all those guys how'd they get such a good crystal ball compared to the professionals?
The pros are compromised, Dave. They read the same stuff we read. It's just that it wasn't in their best interest to share it. And with the cancel culture, you're given the narrative that you're gonna have to go through. One thing about Kazakhstan that people don't realize is that they have an iron grip on uranium and potash production. Ironically, Canada does too. So it's really interesting around the world, where these different things reside. So I own Canadian uranium companies, okay, and Canadian potash companies because I want to be in North America. The Canadians are going to have to make nice with America here soon enough, if they want their people to survive. And then in the United States, there's a really interesting uranium company that's also producing rare earth metals and production. So, the Chinese grip on that's going to end as well. So, so interesting thing on geography, works. And I agree with you on energy. The United States is a swing producer. If politically it comes back into vogue again, the United States could drown the world in energy. So, I don't think right now energy is going up because it's just political miscalculation on the part of the Biden administration. And so we'll probably see oil about $130, by the way, before it subsides, just to get people going. We'll see food prices double too. Now, the good thing about all that, if there's a good thing, it's going to generate a lot of technology that will actually then put those genies back in the bottle, but there'll be a lot of damage done. And I want to be in front of that, so that's why I do what I do, because I want to make sure that I'm in a position to take advantage of it versus always playing catch up or always running scared. And that's why I do what I do and you do what you do, hopefully to get people ahead. Look, this is the most telegraphed global cooling that has ever been given to people. People have basically been given 20 years notice. Before you and I, the Russians were talking about this because it's in their best interest to be prepared for this. They don't have the luxury of the folly of Green New Deal. They have to be prepared or they'll lose their country.
Yeah, speaking of a perfect country, right on Russia's border with Ossetia there, Republic of Georgia. Now, if you go back in history and Noah's Ark, Mount Ararat, where the Ark had landed, just a stone's throw away is this place called Republic of Georgia that had 8,000 years of continuous wine production. So, Bob, grapes are finicky, wine vineyards are finicky, wine vines are finicky. But to have a straight run of 8,000 years of cultivated grape production says something about the stability of the climate between the Caspian and the Black Sea there. And then if you intertwine it with where, the Ark had landed and they talk specifically about this is the first place that the grapes shall be planted. And then we have Republic of Georgia. Another really good, that's on the top of my list of survivability areas of the Grand Solar Minimum in terms of its actual effect. Food growing areas would be there intact. The climate wouldn't shift that much due to the microclimates of the two seas next to that. But politically, now you need to start to add that third animal inside there, the politics of it all. And the population migration is a fingerprint of the Grand Solar Minimum. Perhaps that's why we're all being locked down right now. So people cannot migrate, because through history, if you go back the last 6 Grand Solar Minimums, 2400 BC, massive population migration accompanies every single one of these events. So why would it be different now? And if you knew that, would you not stop the people from migrating? But how would you do it? I thought it was going to be an economic collapse, but obviously there's been a different causation thrown into the bread bowl there.
Yeah, pretty clever on their part. It's going to be ironic, though, is the migration might be from Europe into North Africa.
That's exactly where it's going. Exactly.
So these North African countries, you better learn how to do border control because, northern half of Europe might be pretty difficult place to live. And places like Tunisia and Morocco might just become garden centers, and we're just going to be beautiful. And then, the wheat growing on the other side, or, a lot of irrigation. Remember the Sahara was not to what, 11,000 years ago, the Sahara was a massive, massive plain with actually
6,000.
some areas of forestation. And so the impact on hurricanes from that are going to be interesting too, because you're not going to get the same heat spinning off the Atlantic, so, and we've been seeing that whenever we go into these cool spells, you don't produce as many hurricanes because you don't have the energy to spin it up like you do when the desert's smoking hot and it's not blowing dust onto the Atlantic, baby region of hurricane formation. So a lot of weird things are going to happen that people aren't going to be able to get their arms around because people are incremental, and we're going to see breaks. We're going to see, and that's why I think people's heads are spinning right now, is because they said, well, the model says it shouldn't do that. Well, because you don't have enough data points to know when it did this before. I asked a weather guy yesterday, so what happens when you have basically the La Nina in the Atlantic and the La Nina in the Pacific at the same time? What did your model say? And they didn't know. I'm like, well, come on, you need to know. Yeah. So they always focus on the La Nina that's sitting in in the Pacific, but there's a dipole in the Indian Ocean, and there's a La Nina kind of function in the Atlantic because of the you're talking about the fluctuation of the highs and the lows, and it's going to cause some really crazy weather that people just aren't used to seeing. So, but I have to run, Dave. If I could just put a plug in, people want to trade with us, just come to tradelikeagenius.com. Check us out. We're definitely interested in the areas where we think the money's going to flow, and our algorithms give us those opportunities to find trades, and also help you kind of tiptoe through, I think, a pretty interesting 12 months to come. In terms of markets being overvalued, but there's always going to be a bull market somewhere, and we'll help you find it. And we put together some specials, so go to tradelikeagenius.com or tradegeniusacademy.com. Dave will put some links in, I'm sure, into the description below. Check us out. We have some really good prices, really good deals, and we're a really good community. We're everybody at Trade Genius knows who Dave DuByne is. That's all I have to tell you. So we've been talking for that long.
Excellent. Yeah, I will leave the links in the description box below. And with a parting thought, if North Africa were to become the new breadbasket of the world, many armies would want to invade there. But how many men have been allowed to leave there so there would be no resistance force when others arrive? Put that in your head. Bob, thanks for joining us for the last hour here. And when I say us, I mean myself and everybody else listening. I always learn from you every time we talk, and I hope all of you out there watching got something out of our conversation. And until next month, tradelikeagenius.com. I'm David DuByne from Adapt 2030, Bob Kudla, and we'll talk to you next month. Bye for now.